sisters and brothers, comrades, friends, activists. I have been asked that we have a moment's silence for the three men who were killed just about 100 feet from here, 100 yards, I'm not sure, not far, at the Hub Mall. Also, I want to have included in the moment of silence the memory of Madeleine Parent, who died very recently, one of the greatest trade unionists that I've ever known. And Assunta Data, the last, I believe, of the people from at GWG that we know about, who passed away just a few days ago. And I'd also like that we include in this Paul Moyse's mother, who died just before he came here to speak to us, and he has now gone back to Winnipeg to make the funeral arrangements. A moment of silence, if you would rise, please. Thank you. I now have the great privilege of introducing a very good friend of mine, Dave Coles. This light isn't very good. I know him anyway, I shouldn't even need this. Dave Coles is an activist. He doesn't stand by and watch things happen. He gets there and helps things to happen, leads things to happen. I've known him for a long time as a great organizer of the old Paper Workers Union. And he's now president of we've been talking today about mergers. He's president of a union that merged together the Communication Workers, Energy, and Paper Workers Union of Canada. And Dave is the president since 2003. Now Dave, I said, was an activist. He was active in the 1999 Seattle, the 2001 Quebec City, and the 2002 Calgary anti-globalization protests. He was arrested in 1927 at protests against at the Three Amigos Summit in Montebello. Am I right? No, 2007. Not.
I may be old, Dave, but come on.
Well, I was just feeling young. Anyway, he was arrested also on the Parliament Hill protest against the XL pipeline. Outside of his demonstrated interest in keeping police and undercover agents employed, Dave is probably the best known for his fierce opposition to the construction of the pipeline that will export jobs out of Alberta. Please join me in welcoming Dave Coles.
Thank you, David. Do I have to use the mic?
You got it.
Pooh. It's an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, and I'm very much humbled for the opportunity to be with so many old friends and Comrade Werland. It was a huge lesson, a learning experience for me and my family to spend as many years as I did, both working and living in Alberta. And I do owe you, Dave, and many others a really debt of gratitude for all of the lessons of life and the framing of sort of my and my family's view of how society should be. My welcome to my permanent move to Alberta, because I started working here actually in 1980, trying to organize the Weyerhaeuser Mill in Grand Prairie again and again and again, was within days of moving to Devon, Alberta, which I'll get back to Devon in a minute. We drove headlong into the significant tornado that ripped Edmonton in half, and the small tornadoes that came down the Saskatchewan Valley uprooted all of the trees on my street. And there was my partner and I, Karen Weber, really naive West Coasters with our door opening, watching the action go by, and her flower pots coming off the porch. And that was sort of the beginning of what was a very turbulent time for Alberta. And I can't remember exactly the dates, but shortly after that there was a provincial election. Being a longtime organizer in the NDP, we put up a 4x8 sign in our front yard. Within 24 hours, our house was covered in eggs, tomatoes, and in the middle of the night we heard a chainsaw, and kapow, down goes this very large 4x8 sign in our front yard. So I said to Karen and my children, I said, this appears to be going to be an interesting period of time for us. And it was that for sure. I did spend a considerable amount of time working with the Gainers strikers. And Brother Werland asked my union if I could be seconded to work on the Ziegler strike, which was a very interesting project, and of which a great deal of what I did will never be repeated to anyone. It did not end up being arrested that time, but it was quite a learning experience on the unfairness of the power of these big corporations against workers. So my presentation is going to be in three parts. I'd like to talk a little bit about the past, particularly the past in Alberta, and the influence it had, not just on me personally, on our union, but on the labor movement as a whole, right across Canada. I'd like to deal with some of the issues of the present and what's going on. And I'd like to give you my view, our view in our union on where we think the labor movement, the left, the progressives are going to go in the future. And I'd like to go back again to my comments about the Ziegler strike. And a lot of people in Canada don't realize how corrupt the Conservative government was morally and legally. They passed a piece of legislation during that strike that after 2 years of a strike, the strike is ended. They legislated your right away to withdraw your labor, put an end to the strike. And it's not a well-known piece of history in Alberta, but that set the tone of Conservative governments right across Canada for the next 20 years of being able to deliberately go in and change pieces of legislation that manipulated the rights of workers in favor of those of big corporations. And during that period of time as well, when I was in Alberta, I worked with the Alberta Federation of Labour and many social active groups around the issue of First Nations rights in the Lubicon. And I'm very sad to say that that battle with the Lubicon is not resolved. The Alberta Federation of Labour and our union and many other labour activists are still spending a lot of time, money, and effort trying to get justice for the Lubicons. The Lubicon have not signed a treaty and are being raped and pillaged to this day. And when I mean raped, I'm referring to their land. It was only last year that we had that enormous oil spill on their traditional territories that once again interfered with all of their rights that they have under the Charter in Canada. But in this province, those rights, both in the provincial law and the federal law, have not been recognized. And the Lubicon continue to suffer to this day. And I remember back to the many presentations by Fred Lennerson and Chief Bernard Amiak that taught a lot of us about the injustices and the indignity that First Nations people face, not just here in Alberta, but right across Canada. And I will come back to the First Nations issues later on. There is a lot to be learned about what is happening with this Conservative government and First Nations rights under the Constitution. The postal strike during that period of time was a very interesting process for my children. The postal union had a strike going on, and they came up with this idea of putting little stickers, anti-strike stickers, anti-postal corporation stickers on everything. So my 14-year-old daughter and her girlfriend decided that when the doors went up at the postal station, that they could run faster than the fat security cops could. And they had pockets full of stickers. The gates went up, and in they went into the plant and ran as hard as they could all the way through the plant, putting up these stickers, and correctly so, were able to outrun the fat security guards and the RCMP and the city police, and came bursting out the other side, thinking that it was funnier than hell, right? I had a little lecture with her a bit later on about what had happened if, by some chance, these big fat guys had caught them. But as usual, they didn't pay much attention to me. Probably paid more attention to Karen, but not to me. I think you cannot talk about the history of Alberta without having a little discussion about the Calgary Herald strike. Now, I had the pleasure of running the organizing drive that signed up the journalist in the Calgary Herald and made the application for certification, and we won that right to represent those people. It was a carved out unit, and we could have days of debate about whether we should have actually made the application for a carved out unit. Strategically, it probably wasn't the smartest thing in the world to try to take them on with just one unit, but we did it, and that was the will of the membership. And we tried to bargain a collective agreement with no avail. Conrad Black not only disliked the union, he hated his own employees. And the workers in that plant were not, particularly the journalists, they wanted to get pay raises, but that wasn't their issue. That's not why they joined the union. They joined the union for a little subject called drive-by editorials. So the paper had changed its editorial process so that they would feature the horse races, the car rally, the stampede, but were restricted in many ways of doing proper journalism. And the editors of the paper would pull any decent editorial jobs or work from our members. And after a period of years, they had had enough, and they decided that they were going to join the union. And we ended up in a 9-month labor dispute there. And a lot of people thought that we lost that strike. But I can tell you as a union organizer and later a president that we actually won that strike hands down. What happened is the 93 members of our unit there came to me and said, doesn't matter if we win, lose, or draw, we're never going back to work for that bastard, ever. Well, that did pose a bit of a problem for the union. And I said, well, what are we going to do? Well, you're going to have to figure out that we're not going back and negotiate an end of the strike because we've voted almost unanimously that it's over. We could never lower ourselves. And we did bargain an end, a settlement to that strike. And for years after, when our union went to the bargaining table, our national representatives would say, look, you may be able to beat us in the end, but remember the Calgary Herald strike, we'll bust your nose, we'll make you bleed. Our members are not going to just give in because they're afraid of losing a strike. And it was very successful and helped us organize significant numbers of communication workers right across this country, because the employers, while they thought they may be able to beat us in the end, knew that they were going to pay for that action and pay a price. And I think actually our members created a club called the 93 Club that continues to communicate with each other. And many of those strikers are working in newspapers and radio stations right across this country. Some of them work for the Alberta Federation of Labor. They're scattered all over the country. And it is an example that when workers are determined, they don't necessarily have in their view that in the end they may win the strike, but they have to have the fight. And that's the point. They had to have the fight. And with that type of inspiration from workers, it teaches all of us a lesson around power and how to utilize that. And I think you cannot talk about the past in Alberta without looking at the role of progressive people and politics in the history of the development of Alberta. In particular, the old Ukrainian communist women that came out of the meatpacking industry. I remember Pauline Dimitri, who for years ran the Ukrainian Hall for preparing food for fundraisers, for strikes. These women had been meatpackers all their lives. They had come out of a party organization that was determined to try to change the life and the working conditions of immigrant women and immigrant men. And it had a significant influence. And that wasn't the only example. There's many examples of that where those types of women and men played a significant role of setting us in a course of resistance. I'd like to turn for a minute now to the present. 2007, 2008, the Great Depression. And many progressives, many in the left, many in the labor movement, we've got capitalism on the run. We've got them beat this time. It's world chaos and collapse. And I can remember sitting there going, oh, you haven't been around long enough if that's what you think is going to happen. And I hate to admit that I was right on this one. Capitalism came back with a vengeance, more uglier, meaner, more hateful than it had for a long time. And the manifestation of that is the Harper government we have today. And the left failed. We failed, I failed, we all failed in the progressive left to answer the question when that economic world collapse took place. We couldn't articulate to our membership, to the general public, what the answer was. You know, we talked about co-ops and a kinder, gentler capitalism, but the left couldn't articulate, what do you do about debt? What do you do about the monetary system? Now, many people disagreed with Karl Marx and Engels when they wrote Das Kapital. But they wrote it, and it was at least an argument, an answer that working people, working class people could understand and that we could articulate. But we haven't done that, and we've failed, I believe, to be able to deliver the answer that is acceptable and our members, workers, and the general public will accept. We don't have the answer to debt. The economy, our own homes, everything is built on debt. And when you try to argue that you just don't have to have any debt, you're not being pragmatic, I believe, under our current monetary system. We all do it, and yet we don't have an answer to what's the new model to be. And so we should take that criticism and say to ourselves, all right, that didn't work. What is our answer? And I'm going to get back to that in a minute, because I think that's part of the discussion that we have to have, and I'm so proud that we're having that discussion. Now, you know, I've been shot at, I've been arrested, I've been thrown in jail, I've been beat up by scabs. I'm not much of a fighter, so I didn't win very many. And I've always believed that you should resist, you should fight, you should be in the streets. And we took a lot of criticism, we, the labor movement, 2008, 2009, because we weren't in the streets, we weren't fighting. And I can't speak for other leaders, but I can tell you what happened to my union, to the most militant groups we had. We've never been afraid to strike. We've ran year-long strikes in and out, year in and out, winning most, not all. So we're never afraid to take the boss on. But you explain to me how you take the boss on when the boss ain't there no more. 65%, almost 70% of our membership in the forest industry for that period of time worked for employers that were in CCAA, bankruptcy protection. 100,000 forestry workers went on the dole. Their communities destroyed. How do you strike when you don't have anybody to strike against? So the issue of having a strike against your boss only works when you got a boss. And it took a fair amount of time to get our heads around how we were going to handle this relentless closure and attack, not just affecting our union, but industrial workers in our country. Industrial workers aren't leaving the labor movement. Our density is not going down. The jobs are gone. People aren't leaving the auto workers union. The industry's leaving Canada. And our old concept is, and I can remember, particularly in Alberta, being castigated and booed by our members because we demanded that we bargain good pension plans. And they'd say, oh no, give me the money. I'll put it in RRSPs, and look at the money I'll be rich. Well, many of those workers now have lost their homes, their jobs, and anything that they had in RRSPs are gone. It was a foolhardy approach, supported by the banks, of course. So you had double whammies happening in the industrial sector. If you're in a rural community and you lose your job and your plant shuts down, you lose your nest egg. Your house, from being $200,000, for example, is now worth $25,000 if you're lucky. So our traditional response of having a strike and taking the boss on only works if the economy's good and you can hurt the boss. But if the boss don't care if you go on strike, shuts the door and walks away, this morning at 7 o'clock, I got another notice that the pulp mill in Pictou, Nova Scotia is permanently closed. Liverpool. Sorry, Liverpool, yes. Pictou. Pictou was it was another case yesterday. Today was Liverpool. Liverpool, the Mersey mill went down this morning and will never start up again. How are you going to strike that company? There is answers to these, but we have to think outside of the traditional box that we grew up in a country where everything was always expanding and growing, and you took the boss on and you struck him, and life was good. We got good collective agreements. That's not the case now, and it's not likely going to be the case except in a few sectors for a while. So what's that done? Well, it's created a Harper majority that in modern history is probably the meanest government that this country has seen in a long time, if not forever. Bill C-38, the omnibus bill, which had very little to do with budget and had everything to do with beating up anything that's progressive, whether it's women's issues, First Nations issues, unions, environmentalists, anything and everything. They even went so far as beating up churches. Any church group that has anything to do with supporting immigrant workers or anything to do with social justice, will beat them up as well. Private members' bill attacking reproductive rights. Not much action happening in Canada to defend reproductive rights. I'm afraid it's back on the agenda. Ourselves and the auto workers and others are traveling across the country trying to raise that issue of the attack on a private member's bill on reproductive rights. Then there's this ominous bill 377, another private member's bill that has to do with this phony issue of transparency in unions, and has nothing to do with that at all, but everything to do with controlling unions. And then there's my most favorite rant. And those who are a little longer in the tooth, and were in Alberta when Peter Lougheed was here, we spend a lot of time in our union, and I think the country should pay attention around the issue of national energy security. Peter Lougheed made the news across the country that the national energy program was an affront against Alberta, and I'm paraphrasing because I never get the quote right, but he was going to turn the valve and let the bastards in the east freeze. Well, trouble was, it was bullshit then, and it's bullshit now. There is no pipeline from Alberta through Canada to Ontario and Quebec. Isn't one. It goes through the United States and wanders around, and then, if we're lucky, a little bit of it trickles back into Sarnia. So he was lying then, and they're lying now. And for those of us who spend a lot of time in the energy sector, will know that there is no tar in the tar sands. There's no oil in the tar sands. It's called bitumen. And to get oil from bitumen, you have to upgrade it. Now, whether you're in favor of the tar sands, the bitumen sands, or the oil sands is not the point. The point is it's there now, and what is functioning is the conversion of the bitumen to oil, and it creates good-paying industrial jobs. Our members, the CEP members, the thousands of them that work in the oil and gas industry, do not support unfettered expansion of the tar sands, the oil sands, the bitumen sands, or whatever you want to call them. And we are, and you should be, diametrically opposed to any pipeline that is built to carry unprocessed bitumen out of Alberta or anywhere else. Canada needs to develop a national energy security plan. We need a strategy that will reduce the carbon footprint of Canada, talk about just transition for workers who are displaced because society has made a decision to close or to reduce the use of carbon. And it should be led by the Prime Minister of this country, not cheerleaded. Pump it, dig it, shovel it out as fast as you can. The Prime Minister of this country was in the United States at a meeting, and I was there, when he told the American government that, don't worry, Canada will be the gas tank of the United States. What he is saying is the vast majority of the population who live in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada must now rely on its energy, both electrical and carbon, from some foreign country other than Canada. The vast majority of petroleum products, both refined and unrefined, come in through Portland, Maine, or by tanker up the St. Lawrence, and they come from very democratic places like Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and others. Well, Venezuela, there's a debate about the democracy issue there, and we'll skip over that one, but Venezuela, the North Sea, the vast majority of gasoline is imported from Europe because Europe is going green and has a flood of gas. Processed gas is coming in. Yet, the big chunk of our population live in Eastern Canada, have no access to the resources, both electrical and carbon, from Western Canada. And I think that is immoral. I mean, we can move away from carbon, and we should. You can't do it tomorrow. There's a little global issue in Canada that the odd day in the winter time, we do have to turn the heat on, both in our house and our cars, and we haven't completely figured out how to do that without burning gas and oil. So in the meantime, we're going to have to use gas and oil, but we need to develop an alternate energy plan for this country that includes, of course, just transition for those workers and communities are displaced. And this clown, this bully, this thug, the Prime Minister of our country, has no intent of doing any of that. And we, I think, need to ensure that he's called to task for that, along with his oil company taskmasters. I can tell you, as sure as I am sitting here, standing here, they will not build those pipelines through British Columbia. They never will. And how can I emphatically say that, right? Because they got the majority. Well, I can say that because there is a significant tent being built between labor, communities, politicians, First Nations, and environmentalists that there ain't enough jails in the world that will ever be able to house us if they think that they can build those pipelines to pump bitumen out of Alberta. So we have, I think now, got an opportunity to talk about the future and what's in the best interest of citizens. We are under a significant attack, there's no question, worldwide. But I don't think we should despair. I think, well, I'm very saddened by the number of people who are going to be hurt. I mean, we will have casualties. People will lose their jobs, and women will suffer, and First Nations are going to have to battle. But I think we are in a point in history where we can turn the tide. And why do I say that? Well, I'll go back to the big tent. There's a coalition being built around the issue of energy that would have never happened without the Conservative government having a majority. We've got major environmental groups, First Nations groups, civil society groups, trade unions, putting together a coalition that's going to start to develop an alternative to the way that energy is used in this country. And that type of solidarity are the building blocks of social change. And it will be difficult. You get environmentalists and social activists and trade unionists in the room, and there's going to be conflict because we don't necessarily always agree on the same strategy. But what we do agree on is the end. the end product. And I think that we can put aside our differences and learn what we've said in coalitions all our lives. We agree on what we agree on, and what we're close on, we'll work on. And what we really don't agree on, we just commit not to throw rocks at each other. And that whatever we're going to throw rocks at is going to be the Conservatives, the right wing, the corporations. And if we can learn to work in those kinds of coalitions, then we will build a big tent, and it will change the way that we do politics in this country. And if you look at what happened in the United States around the XL pipeline, our union for 7 years battled in the courts, the National Energy Board. We tried every trick in the world to try to stop the first pipeline, then the XL pipeline, with no avail. We lost everywhere. But the young environmental movement in the United States, and I mean young in age, not young in its existence, were able to mount significant campaigns that coerced and forced the President of the United States to say no. Well, the second he did that, it just rejuvenated the Canadian environmental movement like I've never seen. Like, all of a sudden, yes, we can. And that's what led to all of those arrests on Parliament Hill and just coming together around those issues. And if you can do it over the environment, you can do it over all the issues that affect us. So that's a significant, I believe, positive approach that's taking place in Canada right now. You cannot escape the impact of what's going on here. This is not about, I live in Quebec, by the way. I live in Aylmer across the creek in the other country, and it is fascinating. This is not about tuition fees at all. It's about class warfare. It is about class warfare now. And if I can give the left any kind of advice, please never use the word middle class. There ain't no such animal. You're either working class or you're a 1%er, right? And they've got a significant revolution going on in Quebec. Canadian media, the English media is not covering it, but I'll tell you, it is fascinating to watch that divide. In Quebec, we pay significantly more income tax than the rest of the country. There's no other province that pays a level. We fund education in Quebec, and that's the way we want it as a society. And the changing of that is an affront to a long-standing position in Quebec. And it's turned their eyes towards all kinds of those kinds of class issues in Quebec. Now, it's not spilled out of Quebec a lot, but it is moving the young worker and student movement in significant ways. In Vancouver, when the teachers were on strike, without Jim Sinclair and the labor movement or anybody else getting involved, 1,400 high school students walked out in support of the teachers. Now, they were only out for a couple of days, and they got scared and went back in. But still, these are kids that are 16 and 17 years old. They are out on the street in support of their teachers and education. It is exciting and sad and tear-jerking to watch what's going on in the Middle East, the so-called Arab Spring. But I can tell you, people are prepared to die to change their society in a significant portion of the world. And everybody's watching. And it's exciting people. It's exciting young people. Young people, as I've not seen since the 60s, are engaging in significant ways in class struggle. And that is... I want to brag a little bit. I just hired, on Monday, the president of the Canadian Students' Federation to become a researcher in my office. I don't think she can research anything. She's an extremely good shit disturber organizer. I hired one of the organizers from class the week before from Montreal. These kids know what the hell they're doing. They really know how to organize. And I'm having a bit of a brain miss here, but the young woman from Argentina, the student leader, not many people in Canada know what her history is. She's led huge student movement revolts across Latin America. She's in Montreal. Guess what she's doing, right? These kids are, and they're not children, I shouldn't say that. They're young workers, they're young adults. I'm getting so old, they look like kids to me. So there's a lot of hope, I believe, you just get 300,000 young people on the streets day in after day out, and you don't think you're going to generate some activists? And these are young workers, young students that are PhD students. These kids can spell and they can write. And they got 4 or 5 of these in each pocket. Pink and blue. They got social media down to a science, and they're not afraid to throw their bodies in front of the tank. You could see the arrests one night after another. So there's a lot of hope around that. And I think that type of enthusiasm is catching. I'm noticing big change in the international labor movement, from being bureaucratic to being activist, to being interventionist, to around the issues of Colombia and free trade agreements. The international labor movement is just going in and standing in front of the tanks. So there is a lot of hope. And I want to just close on what we're doing, what the CEP and the Canadian Auto Workers are doing. There's a lot of institutional arrogance in the labor movement. We're the best, right? Just ask any union leader. We're the best. And for years, Ken Luenza and I, we knew that we had to do something. But how the hell do you get the auto workers, who are the best? Just ask them. How are you going to get the CEP, and because we're the best, just ask us, to actually do something different? And we came up with this idea that we're going to not forget our past and all of the knowledge and skills, but we're going to do something different. We're going to build a new union, and we're going to build it in the open. We're going to bring in academics, other trade unions, commentaries, and our members, and say, okay, if you had to do it over again, if you wanted to start from scratch, what would you do? And we're in that process, and it's not been easy, and it won't create the perfect model. But what it has done is it's taken 320,000 workers and put them in a mix where they got a say. And quite frankly, a lot of people are afraid. Our staff is frightened. Many of our local activists are frightened, because what does it mean when you take away their safety blanket? Quite frankly, I'm not afraid of change at all. I think change is necessary, because isn't that what we want? Don't we want to change our society? So it has been a significant step forward for us to go down that road, to take that adventure, and to talk about such things about how do you belong and participate in a union if you don't have a job, if you're not employed, or if you work for an employer that you may never have a union, and never have a collective agreement. And we're talking about those kinds of things. So I would just like to leave with you the thought that we always should have faith in the working class. They will lead the way. They'll get it right. And I know that many that have led before us have said, what gives you the right to think that you're going to get it in your generation? This system we live in, this capitalist system, is geared that very few have it all, and the fight's big. I mean, why should we be surprised? The fight's a big fight, and we just have to fight that fight. Thank you very much.